Hello to everyone that is listening. My name is Aiden Yawn, and I will be working with Claire Walsh, Caroline Willis, and Alex Green in a joint effort to provide more knowledge into Brexit and its immediate and long-term effects.
Thank you for the introduction, Aiden. So before we can talk more in depth about Brexit, we need to understand better the system under which it functions. So what exactly is the EU? Essentially, the EU is a unique economic and political union, and it's made up of 27 different European countries. This union began in 1967 with only around 6 major countries, and then over a period of about 20 years grew to the full coalition we now know today as the EU. This contractual group was originally named the European Economic Community, but that name changed to the European Union, often shortened to the EU, as we'll call it today, in 1993. This union was created in the aftermath of World War II. It was intended to create interdependent states that could coexist peacefully. A large group of United Nations could potentially stop aggressive conflict that was experienced in World War II. There are multiple large-scale and small-scale benefits to having the European Union contract in place. Large-scale benefits include things like no more tangible country borders, a single currency, the euro, all EU citizens having the same equal rights, and maybe most importantly, a single market in which goods, services, and money move a lot more freely than they would with traditional borders. Some smaller scale benefits include more jobs, sometimes slightly more generous wages, a lot of recent moves toward more sustainable policies and greater shared resources across country borders. These are obviously really important and significant benefits and would be awesome in an ideally functioning world. It would make the EU a very fluid, democratic, and transparent system with a few restrictions on its citizens. However, some people, that include prominent political officials, believe that the power of the EU has grown rapidly to the point where the countries are too interdependent and they can't even function individually. Those individuals also argue that a contract involving so many vastly different countries with vastly different needs and cultures and economies cannot have a one-size-fits-all policy to regulate them. Having a one-size-fits-all policy ultimately would have negative economic and social benefits, argues some political officials and citizens.
At first glance, it doesn't look like leaving the alliance would make much sense for a country, and in some respects it still doesn't. But there were many benefits that the United Kingdom enjoyed after their departure. But first, to provide some background into what the European Union did specifically for the United Kingdom and why they wanted to leave. The European Union is extremely protectionist, meaning it doesn't foster innovation and is much more content with being set in its ways and making it very difficult for smaller companies to compete in large markets. The United Kingdom also took exception to the EU providing 40% of its aid to farmers when they only account for roughly 1% of the EU's overall GDP. The UK is already the top 10 economy in the world, but it felt it could grow faster if freed from the EU's regulations. As mentioned before, there would have been some benefits had the UK decided to stay in the EU. For starters, the UK will soon lose some of its international relevance in trade and defense. If the UK would ever be under attack or be engaged in a conflict, they cannot rest assured that the EU will side with them. The people of the UK will also lose the freedom of movement they once enjoyed. It's not like people will be confined to the UK, but they will now need extra travel documentation and converted currency to travel to countries of the European Union. Everyone has differing opinions on whether or not the UK leaving the EU is a good or a bad idea, so I interviewed my roommate Isaac, who is an economics major, to get his take. So, first, can you tell me what you know about Brexit?
I believe that the UK made a little bit of a poor decision. I think renegotiating these trade deals is going to be really difficult. The free trade clause of the EU was a lot more beneficial to every country involved, but having to renegotiate that is probably going to have a lot less favorable conditions for Britain.
So do you think the UK's decision to leave was a good or bad one for their people?
I think overall it's bad. I mean, the ability to move anywhere on the bloc without immigration rules really was really beneficial for job creation as a whole in Britain.
Thank you for your take.
So now that we know exactly what the EU is, how Brexit relates to it, we can better understand Britain's arguments regarding the pros and cons of the entire situation.
So when talking about Brexit, there are going to be numerous reasons for why Britain would want to remain in the EU, and also a lot of reasons for why they would want to leave. First, I would like to talk about the key arguments that Britain has for its departure. To me, the first and most important pro for its departure is the simple sovereignty of the nation. With Britain in sole control of itself, they can create their own laws and regulations without the potential risk of counterintuitive European policies. This is very important because it allows Britain to control its own security, money, and trade, which are three areas that had previously been controlled by the EU. Another pro for leaving comes from the fact that while a part of the EU, Britain was subjected to billions in EU membership fees, which can now be repurposed on things that are more directly important to the British people. The final pro that I want to talk about is the ability for Britain to fully control their own trade, allowing them to finally capitalize on their own economies and resources, and being able to trade with other nations such as Japan, India, and the United States without EU restrictions. Now, although those are a lot of pros, there are also a few major drawbacks and cons to Brexit. First and foremost, a major con for leaving simply comes from the old saying that there is strength in numbers. While being a part of the EU, Britain benefits from being in a community of 500 million people, giving the UK much greater influence in international affairs. Being in a larger community also provides stronger security, as cross-border crime is far more difficult while being part of a bigger group. Another looming con is that there could be struggles within the economy, as there are millions of British jobs connected to Europe. According to journalist Andrew Arkley, there was a steep decline in highly skilled labor in the departments of both nursing and manufacturing immediately following the vote of Brexit. Now, although these cons were very real and concerning, the British referendum vote in 2016 decided by less than 2% in favor of leaving the EU, so it is apparent that the majority of citizens agreed that the pros outweigh the cons in this regard.
There were two competing campaigns during the Brexit debate, the Leave side and the Remain side. In the ultimately successful Leave side, there were several influential politicians and public figures who were credited with the passage of Brexit. The most prominent politician from the Leave campaign was current Prime Minister Boris Johnson. Let's take a look at how he contributed to the passage of Brexit and his rise to power. According to Britannica, Boris Johnson started as a journalist at publications such as The Times, The Daily Telegraph, and The Spectator. This is where he truly began pushing the idea of leaving the EU. At the Daily Telegraph, he served as a correspondent covering the European Community, the former name of the EU. His stories made the EU an object of not just fear, but also mockery, according to Politico. However, Johnson also used controversial rhetoric in his arguments against the EU. In one article, he even equated the EU's efforts to unite Europe to efforts by Hitler and Napoleon. Johnson went on to serve in the House of Commons and later become mayor of London. When he returned to Parliament in 2015, he became the leading spokesperson for Brexit. Johnson also became a prominent opponent of David Cameron, the Prime Minister at the time, and a leading speaker of the Remain campaign, because of his position in the Leave campaign. When Brexit passed and Cameron resigned, Johnson was set up to become the next Prime Minister. But something went very wrong. When Johnson went to announce his candidacy, his key ally, Michael Gove, announced his own candidacy for Prime Minister instead of backing Johnson, and even went as far as to say that Johnson was not equipped for the role. Because of this, Johnson was forced to withdraw his candidacy. It wouldn't be until 2019 that Johnson would become Prime Minister as a result of Theresa May resigning over the failure to pass her version of Brexit through Parliament. As Prime Minister, Johnson also struggled to pass his version of Brexit through Parliament. Although the United Kingdom had formally withdrawn, details needed to be hammered out between the country and the EU regarding trade agreements. A trade agreement was finally reached on December 24, 2020, and Johnson was able to remain in power. Without Johnson, many say there would be no Brexit, but his rise to power is also closely intertwined with Brexit that allows us to say without Brexit, there would be no Johnson. Now, after assessing his role in passing the referendum, plus the pros and cons of leaving the EU, it is time to examine some of the effects this decision had on the United Kingdom's democracy and economic development in order to connect this topic with our lessons from class. In 2021, the United Kingdom's democracy received a freedom score of 93 out of 100 from the organization Freedom House. some of these points were docked because of the effects of Brexit. The passage of this referendum is partly due to an anti-immigration sentiment that swept across the country. Many wanted the UK to be able to control its own borders and limit immigration. The Institute for Public Policy Research found immigrants face heightened racist treatment and poverty due to this anti-immigration policy. This policy is a reflection of the anti-immigration sentiment spurred by Brexit campaigns. It is estimated that the UK's economic development will also be stunted by Brexit. Britain's Office for Budget Responsibility estimates that Britain's economy will be 4% less productive than it would have been as a part of the EU. Although the Leave side campaigned on the idea that Brexit would allow the country to set its own rules that encourage innovation and therefore economic development, many project Britain's economy will actually suffer. Brexit's effects on the United Kingdom's democracy and economy are only a few of many effects witnessed thus far. Next, Claire will further discuss many of the cultural and social effects and responses.
So, now that we know a little more surrounding the formal logistics and the presumed consequences of Brexit, what can we learn about its social and cultural ramifications? This can obviously be a little hard to gauge since there's no singular, correct, or overwhelming opinion and response. However, there are some trends. An academic journal excerpt by Agnieszka Golec, a professor of the Goldsmiths University of London, notes that there are some popular opinions and general consensus. These global and public ideas behind why Brexit came to be include subjects relating to migration, citizenship, borders, nationalism, and interpersonal politics. One of the main public hypotheses is that the Brexit vote was actually related to xenophobia. For anyone who doesn't know, xenophobia is a prejudice towards individuals from countries that are not one's own. According to studies by Golec, some EU citizens think Brexit is linked to British officials feeling threatened by immigrants and foreigners, which all relates back to a level of collective narcissism and nationalism. It seems like many scholars and citizens alike harbor a level of hostility towards the Brexit ideology because it seems to come from a level of a place of hate and xenophobia. That being said, Golec also notes that opinions can vary greatly by location, status, and other general demographics. Researchers found that when people live in regions where GDP output is low, a high proportion of people have low education, a high proportion of people are over 65, and there is a strong net of immigrants, those individuals who live in those communities are more likely to be apprehensive of the European Union and suspicious of immigrants and vote for Brexit. The patterns of voting reflect the attitudes towards immigrants of some of the people in the EU, and they honestly often reflect blatant xenophobia by certain age groups. This social response by demographic is a common political pattern, and the age group that is voting for Brexit makes even more sense when you put it in the context of the attitudes and demographics of those in the party aiming for Brexit.
Today we've discussed what Brexit is, the pros and cons of leaving the EU, Boris Johnson's involvement, the impact on the UK's democracy, and the social impacts in order to paint a picture of how this referendum was able to pass, as well as some of its consequences. Many speculate it will take several more years before we truly know how Brexit will impact the UK society. For now, I leave you with these questions. Did the country make a mistake? Or will the decision to leave the EU prove to be beneficial economically and in terms of immigration, as promised by the Leave campaign?